Thank you again for being here. My name is Yolanda Jones. I am a Senior Project Manager for Community Outreach with Planning. We want to welcome you to Thursdays with the UDO. This is a virtual listening session series that we've held over the past several weeks. I am joined by some staff members from Planning and other areas as well as the members of the UDO team. Today's session's topic is parking. So as I've mentioned, these virtual listening sessions have been held and covered over the last several weeks. These kind of arose out of the types of comments that we'd received to date, feedback we received, and just kind of those hot button topics. These sessions have been a chance and were a chance today as well for you as the community to voice your opinions about the standards and within the first draft of the UDO. They're designed as an additional avenue of feedback for this first draft. The goal of these sessions is for feedback, to listen to your concerns and suggestions. And we'd like to place an emphasis or a note that these sessions are tailored to listening versus responding. Questions and comments shared during these sessions will be transcribed and entered into our comment portal for response after the close of each session. So quickly, I'd like to share a few guidelines with you on how our sessions will run today, our open forum. Those who signed up to speak during meeting registration, you will be called upon in the order for which you registered. Each speaker will have the floor for 2 minutes. And please note that you will receive a request from the meeting host to unmute yourselves when it is your turn to speak. To maintain fairness, you will be muted at 2 minutes once your time has expired, and the next person will be called upon. For those of you who did not sign up to speak during meeting registration, but you would like to speak today, you may enter our queue by placing your name in the chat box, and we will call you as time permits out of that queue. Once the queue has been cleared, attendees may be asked to speak again if for some reason I have to cut you off and you don't get a chance to finish your thought. Again, that is time permitting. And based on the number of registrants we have, we do feel like we would allow you to be able to have that additional 2 minutes to finish your thought. We encourage attendees to share your opinions in an honest and civil manner. And again, the emphasis today will be upon listening versus responding. So here you're going to see a few key dates around the UDO. The first draft was released on October 7th, and we are currently still in the first phase of engagement for this draft. And the comment period for this draft does end on March 18th. That is quickly approaching, so not this Friday, but the next, so a week from this Friday, will be the end of the comment period. So we definitely want you to jot down that date. After the comment period closes, we will review those comments that we have received to prepare a second draft, red line draft of the UDO. This second draft is scheduled to be released in May. The City Council will then have a public hearing in June, as will the Planning Commission provide recommendation. And then we have a hopeful adoption date of July 2022. So today's session will cover or include proposed three-tier vehicle parking requirements, electric vehicle parking requirements, and then also required bicycle parking. We will then open the floor for our open forum for your comments, and then we'll close by highlighting some UDO resources that you can tap into, as well as how you can access the previous listening sessions. Today, we're going to have a presentation from Alan Goodwin, Deputy Project Manager for the UDO. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, Yolanda. Let me start by telling you where the parking requirements are in the UDO. They are in Article 19, off-street vehicle and bicycle parking, which is in Part 3. So if you look in the UDO table of contents, you'll find Part 3, Article 19. And then within Article 19, there are 11 different subsections. We are not going to have time to cover all of those today. It also talks about the design of parking structures and parking lots and valet parking. We're going to focus today on the proposed vehicle parking requirements, the electric vehicle parking requirements, and then bicycle parking. So because we're proposing a three-tier parking system that is based on zoning districts, I thought it might be useful to just give you a quick glimpse at what our proposed zoning districts will be in the UDO, and they're generally divided into neighborhood zoning districts, which are our residential areas, employment zoning districts, and our centers zoning districts, which also includes our transit-oriented development districts. And then finally, a manufactured home park district is kind of an outlier. So the three-tier system will be based on these zoning districts. And I mentioned the three-tier approach, and here it is. So tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1, as proposed in the draft UDO, will be our more auto-oriented, less pedestrian-oriented districts that aren't as likely to be served by transit, for example, or have good pedestrian facilities. They include our ML1 and ML2 districts, ML meaning manufacturing and logistics, or kind of industrial, if you will. A couple of our campus districts, IC1, Institutional Campus 1, and our Office Flex campus, as well as that manufactured home park, and all of our neighborhood 1 districts, as well as our neighborhood 2A and 2B districts. And in tier 1, those districts are proposed to have a minimum requirement for off-street parking and no maximum parking limit. Our tier 2 districts include our industrial mixed use, our industrial campus 2, as well as our neighborhood center, our neighborhood 2C, our 2 commercial districts, and our community activity center 1 district. And the tier 2 includes both a minimum parking requirement as well as off-street parking maximums. Finally, tier 3 are our more urban walkable districts, including our 4 TOD districts, or transit-oriented development, as well as our Uptown Center, our Community Activity Center 2, Regional Activity Center, and our Uptown Edge. These districts, for the most part, will have no parking minimums. They will have parking maximums. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Certain uses within proximity to lower density residential may have a minimum parking requirement. So in a little more detail, I'll go into each of those 3 tiers. Going back to tier 1, as I said, they will have a minimum parking requirement and no maximum, as currently drafted in our draft UDO. And an example of what that minimum parking requirement might be, and they will depend on the use, but for example, a single family home, the minimum parking requirement would be 2 spaces per dwelling unit. Other residential, like an apartment or townhome, maybe would be 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. And for non-residential uses in those zoning districts, they do differ, but typically they're 1 space per 500 square feet of building area. That would be the minimum parking requirement. Obviously, different uses may have different parking requirements based on their unique characteristics. For example, a car wash would have a less of a parking requirement because people are not typically parking there and using that for any long term. Like a correctional facility, for example, would be another where most of the people there don't have a need for a parking space. Tier 2 is that tier with both parking minimums as well as parking maximums. So the minimum, for example, for residential uses would be 1 space per dwelling unit, and the maximum parking would be 2 spaces per dwelling unit. For non-residential uses in this tier, the typical minimum would be 1 space per 750 square feet, and the maximum would be 1 space per 250 square feet. And again, as with tier 1, some uses will have different parking standards based on their unique characteristics. And so those examples are typical, but may not be across the board for every single use in this tier. And finally, our tier 3, our most urban districts, will have for the most part, no minimum parking requirements. I mentioned exceptions to that rule. So for multifamily residential, for live performance venues, for micro production of alcohol, and our typical breweries, nightclubs, restaurants, and bars, within 200 feet of neighborhood 1 zoning, there will be a minimum parking requirement of 1 space per 500 square feet, plus a little bit of extra parking if there's outdoor seating or activity areas. And then for residential, that multifamily residential, the minimum parking would be 1 space per dwelling unit. The maximum parking for this tier is typically 1 to 2 spaces per dwelling unit for residential development. And for non-residential, again, typically the maximum would range from 1 per 200 to 1 per 300 square feet, depending on the use. The minimum vehicle parking spaces are calculated based on the use. And so if there are several different uses in a development, the minimum would be calculated by totaling the sum of the requirements for each of the uses in that development. And when a development needs to provide minimum off-street parking, would occur with any of these 3 circumstances. One would be new construction of a principal building. Obviously, that would trigger a requirement to provide minimum parking if minimum parking was applicable. Or if an existing principal building is expanded, resulting in the requirement for more than 10 additional spaces, then those spaces would have to be provided. Or if a development changes use, or an existing use is expanded that results in a requirement for more than 10 additional spaces, that minimum parking would have to be provided. There are certain spaces that are exempt from parking maximums. Any ADA handicap parking that's required is exempt from parking maximums. Any electric vehicle installed spaces, as well as pickup and drop-off spaces for things like Uber and Lyft, ride-hailing, delivery spaces set aside for deliveries, or spaces for the exchange of goods. Any on-street parking spaces that abut the use are exempt from parking maximums. And townhouses and multifamily are permitted spaces for visitors that may exceed the total number of spaces allowed in the parking maximums. So that's a quick overview of the vehicle parking requirements, generally the 3-tier system. And as Yolanda said, we're here today mostly to listen to your comments, so we don't get into that really too deeply into the details of that, but that's an overview. I'd like to move next to the electric vehicle charging station requirements, because this is brand new to Charlotte. Some of our peer cities around the country have got electric vehicle parking requirements. Our adopted city policies around sustainability encourage the use of electric vehicles. And so in the UDO, we are trying to prepare for what we anticipate will be a higher demand for EV parking spaces in the future. We've divided our EV parking requirements into 3 categories, which are generally recognized. EV capable, which means simply the installation of capacity in the electrical panel of a development to provide space for future demand for EV parking, as well as a raceway from that electric panel to the location of future EV parking spaces. But EV capable does not mean that there has to be an outlet at the end of that parking space to plug into. EV ready, on the other hand, is the installation of the panel capacity and the raceway, but also conduit that would terminate in a junction box or a 240 volt outlet that's accessible to the parking space. So this is the parking spaces that could potentially be used to charge a vehicle. And then finally, EVSE installed is the installation of an actual level 2 electrical vehicle charging station. So not every development would have a requirement for EV charging. in the initial rollout of this particular requirement. We decided to impose this requirement for EV charging only on these uses: multifamily stacked dwellings, or typically apartment houses, or taller multifamily dwellings. The residential component of a mixed use development. So if you've got a development that's partially residential on the upper floors, for example, and commercial or office on the ground floor, hotels, and parking lots and parking structures as a principal use. These are the types of uses we felt would have the greatest demand for EV parking, especially overnight EV parking. So, people who lived in apartments, people who were staying in hotels overnight and had an EV vehicle that needed to be recharged, and then any parking lot. You can see in the table that if there are fewer than 10 required parking spaces, there is no requirement to provide EV parking. If the parking spaces provided is from 10 to 25, then you've got a certain standard of EV parking, and another tier is at 26 to 50 parking spaces. And then finally, for if more than 50 parking spaces are provided, that last line. And typically what this is that we would require 20% of the parking spaces provided in these examples to be EV capable, which is that lowest tier, which is basically just providing room in the electrical panel for future demand, as well as a raceway to the location of future EV parking. And then 10% of the provided parking spaces would be EV ready, which is not only the panel capacity in the raceway, but a junction box or a 240 volt outlet at the end of it. And then finally, if you're providing more than 25 parking spaces, there would be a requirement to provide either one EV parking space in that tier of 26 to 50 parking spaces provided, or if you're providing more than 50 parking spaces, 2% of those spaces would have to be EVSE installed, or an actual charger station. EVSE installed spaces would not count toward any applicable parking maximums. And if there's a parking minimum required, those spaces would count as 2 spaces. So moving on from EV parking finally to bicycle parking, there is a requirement to provide bicycle parking if a new building is constructed or an existing building expanded, resulting in a requirement of more than 5 additional bike spaces, or a change of use that also would require more than 5 bike spaces. If any of those events occur, then the required bicycle parking must be provided. Bicycle parking can be thought of in terms of short-term parking and long-term parking. So typically the long-term parking is a percentage of the required total bike parking that's required. We'll get into that, I think, on the next slide. And then all other spaces are designated as short-term. Where bike parking is required, there's a minimum of 2 short-term bike parking spaces required. There's never less than 2. If there are more than 30 short-term required bike spaces provided, the development need not exceed that 30. So there may be, because bike parking is sometimes based on the size of development, if a huge development is being proposed, that would possibly result in more than 30. There is a requirement that the development need not provide more than the 30. And for non-residential uses, again, no more than 50 long-term bike parking spaces are required. So, if you've got a tall tower office building that ordinarily might be required to provide more than 50 long-term spaces, the development is not required to provide more than 50. There's a bike parking table in the UDO, just as there is a vehicle parking table. So it is by use, according to use. And so you can see that the bike parking table uses mimic the uses in our use table. And there are some uses that don't require a minimum bike parking. For example, single family, duplex, triplex, quads, and townhomes are residential uses that don't have a bike parking requirement. The thought there is that for those types of developments, typically people would bring their bicycles in or have a garage or some similar arrangement for leaving their bikes. And then there are some other non-residential uses that would not have minimum bike parking. Things that are typically more auto use oriented uses like a car wash or a gas station, or in some industrial uses like a salvage yard or recycling center, uses where you typically would not expect people to be riding their bikes. And finally, we do have some bicycle standards, design standards. So bike lockers and racks for short-term and long-term bike parking got to be meet the standards of our land development standards manual, although alternate designs can be approved as well. Short-term bike parking may be located in the public right-of-way if approved by CDOT or the North Carolina DOT is applicable. Long-term bike parking spaces have to be fully covered, and that can be done either in a bike locker, such as the one shown in the photo, or indoors in a garage or parking garage, or even inside a building. So that concludes the overview of our parking standards. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back to Yolanda to open up our forum.
Thank you, Alan. So prior to opening the forum, we do have, I believe, one participant who has joined us via phone. So in order to be sure that we have everyone accounted for who'd like to speak, we're going to now send you a request to unmute. The last 4 digits of that phone number are 70445. So if you could press *6 to unmute and give us your name. Just we want to be sure that we do not miss anyone who has registered to speak, and because we can't see your name. Again, that's 7045, and you'll just press *6.
Okay, I've done that.
Awesome, I can hear you. If you could just give us your name, we want to be sure in case you are one of our registered speakers.
Yes, I did register. This is Suzanne Wittebort.
Awesome, thank you, Suzanne. We will call you in the order for which you registered. You can press *6.
Great.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. So I'll quickly go back over our guidelines for speaking. Each speaker will be given the floor for 2 minutes. You will receive a request from the meeting host to unmute yourselves when it is your turn to speak, and I'll call those names out. To maintain fairness, once your 2 minutes has expired, you will be muted so that we can move on to the next person. Those of you who did not sign up to speak during registration but do wish to speak, please place your name in the chat and we will add you to a queue to speak. It looks like we will definitely have time to call up people from the queue today. If for some reason, and I don't want to be the bad guy, I have to cut you off at 2 minutes, if we do have time to come back to allow you an additional 2 minutes to finish your thought, we will definitely return back to you. Also, I just want to take a moment to explain that, again, today we are set to listen to your concerns, your feedback, and anytime you pose a question, we will add those to our portal for response. What we don't want to give is the false impression that if you provide options for potential changes within the UDO, that those will be responded to, because the second draft is going to reference those. That is the goal of the red line draft. So if you add something into our comment portal, or if you speak it here today, it will still be added to the comment portal, and it is a potential change. We just don't want you to expect a response immediately. We will review those changes during the review of the comments for the second draft, red line draft. And with that, I believe we can go ahead and get started. The very first speaker I have today is Eric Zavaro. Eric, are you with us today?
Yep, I am. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay, I'll try to fit this in 2 minutes. Thank you for this opportunity to provide comments today. Providing the following comments on behalf of Sustain Charlotte. And overall, we are happy to support and glad to see the electric vehicle charging stations and bicycle parking included in the draft. We have two things that we'd like to comment on those though. We believe that EVs are the future and that we need at least one EV ready space in the 0 to 9 segment, or at the very, very least, the EV capable. That should also pertain to the 10 to 25 spot section as well. And I believe there's a huge miss with not including office use in that as well. That would cut down the people commuting to work and being able to charge their vehicles. And as far as long-term bicycle parking, we believe that adding not just out of weatherproof storage areas, that long-term bicycle parking also needs to be secure in those parking decks or whatever because of bikes being stolen. So that's a critical word to include. And moving on to parking calculations, maximums and minimals. In the ideal world, Sustain Charlotte would support removing all minimums from the draft and being replaced with maximums using the current drafted minimums. We know that that might not be possible, but that's what we would love to see. But considering that we would like some changes that are currently put in the draft, we would suggest removing measuring parking by GFA, the gross floor area, and include net interior area that would not include areas like lobby, machine rooms, stairs, lifts, columns, bathroom areas, ducts, and risers. That would reduce that amount of space. I think I ran out of my 2 minutes. I could continue later.
Actually have it's going. You just did hit it. You're right on it. Thank you, Eric, for your thoughts. If we have time, we will come back to allow you to finish your thoughts, but thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, my next speaker is Greg Carmichael. Greg Carmichael, are you with us this afternoon?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may go ahead and speak.
Okay, I'm sorry. And I might have gotten the wrong session, but I was interested in, it's a landscape screening question in relation to the dumpsters and trash containers. But this seems to be all regarding parking. So did I get on the wrong session?
You may have, are you, and I'll take a moment of privilege here. Are you referencing possibly the policy map in some way?
No, it was all in regard to landscape screening.
Okay.
For trash enclosures. I submitted quite a lot of information after the last session.
Okay.
Back in December, I think it was.
Okay. And
I'm sorry, I may have gotten the wrong one.
Have you submitted those via our public comment portal for the UDO?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So those will be, they're uploaded periodically. If you'll go back to see if your questions have been answered. If not, if you want to drop those in the chat, we'll be sure to get those back into the comment portal for points of clarification.
Okay, thank you very much.
Laura did respond. We do have your comment in the portal. Okay, I'm sorry. So Laura Harmon is our project manager. She did respond to that. So thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
My next speaker on the list is Planning Commissioner Philip Gusman.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing well. Mostly I'll cede most of my time back to Eric. I'm sure he's got a few more comments to make. And they sound good. They sound very good. I mostly wanted to grab some time and just encourage everyone, please use this opportunity to speak up. This is a vital process for us. And on the planning committee, I know we are watching and listening to these sessions, and the information that's collected from them by staff is presented to us. This is a key way. Parking itself can be very challenging, especially when we're in the planning phase. And if we can get this right, it'll be because all of us came in together and expressed ourselves, our needs and our wants through this process. So I just encourage everyone to speak up regarding the parking. I love some of the progressive elements that we have in the plan. And at the same time, I know parking can become a very challenging issue for our communities. So Thank you. I'll give my time back.
Thank you, Commissioner Gusman. The next speaker that I have is Michael Groover. Michael, are you with us this afternoon?
I am.
Hello.
Hello there. Okay, I wanted to start by saying, first of all, that I support the efforts of groups like Sustain Charlotte and Eric's group and what they're trying to do, and the green and progressive elements. But I would like to point out that in the past, a lot of the development policies, strategies, and ordinances when it comes to parking in Charlotte have focused really on how they impacted developers and whether or not they encourage development projects. And I wanted to make the point that this shouldn't be the primary purpose of things. And it looks like we're making a great headway in moving away from that. So I applaud the effort of this group in doing that. But one of the aspects of the policies in the past when it comes around to parking, and in particular, this tiered structure, is that it's allowed the growth of paid parking businesses and properties and towing and booting ordinances to grow. That was by design, because many of the people who made their living from paid parking and towing were on the city council, the county council, and even several mayors of Charlotte in the past. That's not the way it is now, but the ordinances that we have now were very much shaped by that. It allowed the growth of those things. And one of the things I would like to talk about, and I don't want to impact how we view the requirements for bicycle parking, EV parking, and also promoting public transportation, but I really would like to look at and have us discuss free parking for everywhere, regardless of what the requirements are.
Mr. Groover, I'm
Yes.
going to have to cut you off just as you met your 2 minutes. However, we will try to wrap back around you to finish your thought.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. My next speaker is Julian Rosavi. Julian Rosavi. Are you with us this afternoon? Okay. Dan Manus. Dan.
Hi, Yolanda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You can go right ahead, Mr. Manus.
Fantastic. Thank you for the detail on the presentation. And I think, like many others have said at the beginning of their comments, I would also like to agree with and support a large part of what Eric and St. Charlotte are moving to have introduced into the UDO. I am excited to see the introduction of some new thought surrounding parking minimums in the city, but I'm a little bit disappointed to see their continued existence and to see us, while we as a city claim to view affordable housing and sustainability and supporting the environment as priorities in the city, the continued inclusion of parking minimums in our zoning code is incredibly contrary to that. And as a city that prides itself as having a strong business community, I think it's important for us to focus on allowing the market to dictate what's an appropriate amount of parking for a particular project instead of having the city put in mandates of what the minimum amount of parking should be. And I'll see the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next speaker is Kevin Murphy. Kevin Murphy. Are you with us this afternoon? Okay. Blake Morgan. Blake Morgan.
I'm here. Thanks so much. I want to say, Alan, thanks for the overview. I really appreciate it. And Gordon, thank you for putting this in the Observer this morning. It was so helpful. That's why I wanted to sign up. But I've only been here about 2 years. I'm only 23 years old. But most of why me and my fiance love Charlotte is because we're in South End. We're able to walk to things. We're able to see a lot of growth. But as these areas for walkable and more transit-friendly corridors start to grow and get more expensive, I'm really worried that Charlotte's headed in a direction where I'm going to have to drive everywhere. I'm going to have to be in a car to be able to go places because we're not really pushing transit-friendly options. I think of having parking minimums at bars and things. Like, I personally can't fathom having to drive places to drink. It's illegal to drink and drive, but yet we're still thinking and building for a car first. And it's just so concerning for me that this is going to have such a lasting impact on the city. And, you know, I'm definitely not a civil engineer or know exactly what I'm talking about, but Eric and Sustain Charlotte, that makes so much sense. And really hope that we can move toward removing a lot of these minimums. Businesses and developers are going to build parking based on the community needs, and they're going to pay the price if they don't have enough parking. I don't think it's fair to limit development, limit businesses, and limit the community's involvement in a lot of these projects solely because of parking. I look at a city like Houston and I'm just appalled. There's so much surface parking and almost all of it is constantly empty. And you look at rising gas prices, people moving away from car dependency, and then we're planning long-term for it. It's just really concerning. And I hope that we can at least look at what other cities are doing, San Francisco, Raleigh, and move away from these parking minimums. But I greatly appreciate everyone having this time in this forum, but I yield it back.
Thank you, Blake, for your thoughts. Our next speaker, Susan Whitboard. Susan Whitboard, I believe you are our phone participant, so you'll hit *6 when you receive that request to unmute. Suzanne, and I'm so sorry I was calling you Susan. Suzanne Whitboard.
Oh, hello. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I apologize for messing your first name up, Suzanne. I got it now.
No, no problem.
Here.
No problem. Thanks very much. And thank you for this opportunity. My question and my concern are regarding parking around schools, particularly student parking around high schools. I live on Fairfax Drive, which is just off Runnymede across from Myers Park High School. In the last 2 years, after the installation of a traffic light and crosswalk across Runnymede, we've been flooded with students parking on our street at 6:30 in the morning, as well as nearby Windsor Drive. In the 5 blocks of our narrow residential streets, we now have approximately 100 student cars parked every school day, just in this little small area. So our narrow residential streets were not designed to be parking lots. This is causing major disruptions, including blocked driveways, blocked access for delivery trucks and garbage trucks and service providers, damage to our property, trash thrown all over, including drug paraphernalia. But our major concern is the safety. We have inexperienced young drivers speeding in and out of our streets. We don't have sidewalks here, and so residents are walking their dogs and walking their children to school in the streets while we have all these young drivers zooming in and out constantly. So this is an accident waiting to happen. We recently submitted a petition signed by virtually every resident on Fairfax Drive to asking that we change the parking regulations to match other streets around the high school to limit the student parking. So, and we've been expressing these concerns for some time, and to be honest, we've been somewhat disappointed by the lack of response to our concerns. It does not seem that people are listening to us. But anyway, as far as the planning goes,
I'm going to have to stop you for just one moment. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. You have met your 2 minutes. However, we will hopefully be able in just a moment to call you back up to finish your thought.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to be sure we have 2 speakers that we called out a little earlier that I want to be sure that we are recognized to see if they're here. Julian Rozovi, if you are here. or Kevin Murphy? Okay. That has concluded our list of registered speakers. If anyone who would like to speak was not registered, you can drop your name in the chat so that we may add you to the queue. But what I'm first going to do, since I don't currently have any names in the chat to speak, Eric, I'm going to call you back up so that you can finish your thought, because I know I had to cut you off and I don't want to do that. Go ahead and give you an additional 2 minutes and let you finish your thought.
Okay, thank you. And I remember where I left off as well. So
Awesome.
So adding a bonus in Article 16 for adaptable parking decks, considering adding this bonus for decks that are constructed that could easily be converted to usable people space for residential, commercial, etc. Changing the parking requirements for Tier 3, having more aggressive parking maximums near rapid transit stations. This would also include the uptown core and edge districts. Suggestions of the 1-bedroom that currently are in the draft are more than what's in the current TOD. So adding this exception like we have for a single family home that currently is in the draft to include minimums, this would be to be strict on that parking in TOD areas and in the uptown area, which is mostly a TOD to begin with. Let's see, I noticed some specific corrections. I know that the CAC-2 was in both Tier 2 and 3. I think that was a mistake. It should be in Tier 3 only. We also suggest that neighborhood 2-B district be included, removed from Tier 1 and put into Tier 2. Maximums that do not apply to parking structures in Tier 2. I think that is also a mistake. That needs to be included, these parking structures in those maximums for Tier 2. One other thing, you know, we support electric parking, but we may need to be careful that that's not abused, since that is not part of the parking maximums. Maybe you know, putting a cap or having a relationship between those and the current existing maximums for traditional parking may need to be watched over so they are not abused. And one last final comment that pertained to 2 of the speakers. In a lot of the problems we face between residential neighborhoods and dense areas, suggested a parking benefit district be overlaid in those areas where meters and residential parking permits would be included. Off-street parking decks would be public decks would be the best solution. All of the revenue in that district would go back to the neighbors in that neighborhood. And in the situation Suzanne mentioned, no sidewalks, that revenue could be used to build those sidewalks in those areas, or whatever the neighborhoods are requesting or what they're lacking, that funding could be used for those areas. That would solve a lot of those problems that we face, because there is really no land that is free. So that includes parking, the cost to pave, the cost to build, and that gets transferred on to every single one of us, whether you have a car or not. So the ones who are driving, those fees would be collected and then reused for the neighborhoods. And I think that would go a long way of solving those problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And just as a point of clarification and fairness, I gave you an extra minute only because some folks had yielded back their time and I did not want to have to cut you off again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thank you to those that support us.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to go back to Suzanne Whitford. I also had to stop you from speaking, but want to give you time to finish your thought if you want to pick back up. Suzanne, you should be receiving that request to unmute *6. We can hear you.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, well, I was just wanting to finish with, well, a question as to whether this issue about parking around schools was going to be addressed, and a suggestion, which is that I don't know if the city can work with the school district to address the issue of whether or not more parking can be provided on school grounds. For example, Myers Park High School has a 62-acre campus And it seems to me that perhaps they could find some more room on their 62-acre campus for some more parking, or maybe work with them about requiring carpooling or some other kinds of incentives to reduce the amount of traffic. I think that might be a good suggestion. So that was all I had to say, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your thought. So that is the end of my speakers list, and also those who had signed up to speak or registered to speak prior to. Again, I want to give one final push. If you would like to speak, you can put your name in the chat so that we can call you up. However, I can see that we've gotten some comments and questions in the chat. Just to reiterate, these will be transcribed and placed into our comment portal. If they are questions of clarification, they can be answered. They will be answered in the comment portal. However, if they are, I guess, concerns, or not necessarily concerns, but if you are looking to have a change within the UDO, those may not be answered until the second draft, because again, that period that for which we will review those will be done after March 18th for that second red line draft. Okay. Thank you, Alan. Sorry, my screen. So just moving on to our final two slides, what you'll see before you is our slide that shows you resources that are available to you to help you understand the UDO, as well as how you comment. We need your feedback. It is so very important and vital to this process, and we need you to submit your feedback by next Friday, March 18th, a very important date. Please jot that down, put it on your calendars, give yourself a reminder. March 18th, Friday, March 18th is the last day to comment on this first draft of the UDO. We do ask that comments be submitted by topic. However, if you do provide us with general comments, they're welcome. But again, topic-based comments are most helpful for our staff to be able to identify and respond to. And hopefully they will be tied to specific UDO articles and sections. A video tutorial is available on our website in order for you to be able to learn how to comment. So if you're having any trouble with with commenting, please utilize that resource on charlotteudo.org in order to understand how you may comment. And then finally, this is just an overview of the past several weeks of listening sessions. This is our final listening session for this phase or phase of engagement. However, if you would like to go back and listen to any of the previous listening sessions, they can be found on charlotteudo.org. They have previous sessions as well as today's session were offered from 12 to 1, and then again from 6 to 7. Registered participants, just like you did, registered for the meeting to sign up to speak. So once you get to charlotteudo.org, you will be able to find meeting recordings, slides, and chat transcripts, not only for these listening sessions, but for our virtual conversations. So I do want to point out that the virtual conversations we held earlier in our engagement phases actually do go into more depth about some of these topics. It was more of a presentation about the topic itself against just listening to comments or feedback. So if you have any questions, you may go back and listen to some of those sessions and it may be answered if you did not have a chance to attend, but those are available on our website. That is the end of our session. We are so super thankful for you all being with us today. We will stick around for the next couple of minutes. Again, if anyone just has the hankering for speaking, please put your name in the chat. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.